My name is Jill, and I'm so delighted to be here. But after a very long and interesting speech by Rajaji, I would like to ensure you have time for questions. So I think in 10 minutes, I can just make one or two points. Does that sound
No, you have
okay?
You have 20 minutes.
Then there would be no time for
No,
questions.
there is another 20 minutes.
Yes. Okay. So, good. All right. So I just wanted to speak a little bit about how this social leadership and nonviolence got expressed in the Jai Jagat March, which Rajaji was speaking about. You know, we're here in Armenia after 6 months of walking, but a long period of time in preparing this Jai Jagat campaign. And, you know, back in 2014, we had, I think it was 30 young people from 15 different countries. They all came together in Sheshi Center in Madurai, just outside of Madurai in Tamil Nadu. And we spent a week looking at nonviolence. And there were people there from Latin America and Africa and North America and Europe. And what was so interesting is this was the first time many of them had really thought about how violent our society is today and how nonviolence is a way forward. And again, 2 years later in 2016 and 2 years after that in 2018, we met with many grassroots women in India, mainly in North India, to really discuss how do you see nonviolence? How does nonviolence come into your community? How do you build it as a community asset? Because we understand how to have a well or how to build other kinds of assets, but how do we bring nonviolence into our development? And you know, with all of this, we collected these ideas and these networks. And in 2019, we got a youth group together of about 60 young people in Bhopal. And out of that 60, it was a recruitment camp to take 10 youth fellows with us on this long Jai Jagat march. What was really interesting is we were trying to look for, do these young people have a commitment to a different kind of world? Do they really want to become international peace builders? And you know, we found many that did. And so these 10 plus many other international and other grassroots leaders from India came together as a group of 50 and started walking from New Delhi to Geneva. I think what is really interesting about that is that the time we spent together, you know, 6 months living, sleeping, and eating with 50 people is quite an experience. And the reason it was so interesting was two main points I want to raise to you. One is that we were traveling through village after village. We started in Delhi and went all the way to Varda. So we passed through Haryana, and then we went a little bit through UP, and then we went into Rajasthan, and then into Madhya Pradesh for a long period in Madhya Pradesh, crossed practically most of the state, and then into parts of Maharashtra to get to our destination. But as we were walking these 2,000 kilometers together, village by village, we found that we began to change. We were in touch with communities that were nature dependent communities, Adivasi communities, communities where people are fisher folk on the large river systems. We found we were with small farmers. And this really impacted us because we began to understand what it was like at the grassroots, how people at the grassroots are really making change and making a difference. But because they're invisible, that difference is not always appreciated. And I think we also had a chance to influence certain people to take up nonviolent action. You know, we went to a place called Vidisha, which is near Bhopal in Madhya Pradesh, and there was an engineering school there. And they said, wow, this nonviolence, how do we bring nonviolence into the minds of engineering students? And we began to talk to them, and they decided that they would set up a center for excellence in nonviolence on their campus so that people would be aware of what is nonviolence and how does it relate to development and how does technology intervene in that development. And so we also found we met pastoral people without land, and we were able to take their grievances to the local district collector. So we were getting changed by the very actions that we were taking up as we were marching. And in fact, this was like a learning on the road, not a classroom, not just in a informal, non-formal training center, but actually walking on the road, interacting with people. And as many of the young people became very, very influenced by this. And we didn't just stop at India. You know, we sent a team to Nepal who interfaced with many Nepali people around nonviolence, around what does it mean and how do you construct it in development, in land relations, in land reform. We sent a team to Pakistan, and they went and talked to the local government and the officials. These were Nepalis who went to Pakistan as Indians were not able to. And then we sent a team to United Arab Emirates, to Dubai, to Abu Dhabi, and so on, to talk about nonviolence. And this is one of the, you know, the centers of capitalism in the world. And yet many people found it so interesting because there is a yearning to understand why our systems are not treating people fairly, why our governments are separated from people, why there's so much violence in this society, this Gulf states that so many people go and visit and work in. And we also went to Iran and learned about how even in this war situation between the US and Iran, we began to touch and understand local people and what their issues were. And we got influenced and we got changed. And finally, we came to Armenia and we went and saw hundreds of school children across 500 kilometers of walking through the mountains. This is a Caucasian area, Caucasian mountains. And this was such a learning on the road. And I think I just sum up, because I want you to have some time for questions, is what really the young people said to me about all of these learnings is that not only have we become changed and we become nonviolent, but we've understood that nonviolence isn't a state of being. It's a search that we have to practice every day to be more nonviolent, to be more compassionate, if we're going to sow the seeds of nonviolence in communities, in learning spaces, in our activities with other people. That it's very important that we learn to be nonviolent. And the second thing many of the young people said, which I found so interesting, I wanted to share with you, is they said, we always thought that urban educated elites is really where we should be in India. But after living and being with poor people at the grassroots level and understanding how much they're violated, not only by government, but by large landholders, by industrialists, by land grabbers, they are in the nature-based communities so much in defense of nature and a non-violent relationship with nature. And we must learn something from this. We don't need to go back and become all nature-dependent communities. Our civilization has gone well beyond this, but at least we can open our hearts and minds and learn much more about this. So these were two things. And as Rajaji said, when everybody went home, unfortunately, the COVID virus, the pandemic, forced us to suspend the march halfway through, 6 months out of a year. We were not able to make it to Geneva. But the 4 pillars, everybody took home with them, that they need to reduce poverty, they need to reduce social discrimination, they need to really work on climate change to make sure it's halted, and they need to stop conflict and war. And as the COVID-19 has come upon us, friends, we understand how important these 4 pillars are, because the vested interests in a time of weakness where people are in so much fear, they will find ways to not, they look at the migrant laborers that are without work, that do not have a traditional livelihood to go back to. This reminds us how important in this COVID-19 time, how important eradicating poverty is, so that all people can grow in our society, not just one section, leaving another section in pure depravity. We've learned that the migrants who have been caught in the Middle East that are trying to get back to Tamil Nadu and Kerala now, that they need to find ways that they don't suffer so much social inequality and be just left in the way that they have in their jobs and in their work. In terms of halting wars, we've seen how stupid wars are when we see people are still fighting in the middle of this COVID epidemic, and we understand how important it is to rebuild the environment and stop this climate crisis if, in fact, we're going to have a greater harmony with nature. So these 4 pillars are our guide to nonviolence, and it's you, I hope, that as future leaders, in your ability to take a leadership role in society, that you'll keep these in mind and keep many of the lessons that you've heard from Rajgopal in mind as you enter into your future. But my goodness, this has been a great pleasure. And I leave it at this point so that there's at least 10 minutes left for some questions and responses to the discussion. Thank you very much. Jai Jagat, namaste.
Yes. So, can you tell something about dialogue and advocacy? How you guys are you meeting millions of people and met lakhs of people during March? Tell something about your
Yes,
advocacy and dialogue experience with
sure,
us.
sure, shall do. I'm just trying to see where the chat is here. Okay.
Dialogue and advocacy. Yes, go on, Jitu. Dialogue and advocacy. Yes, that's very important area. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you very much. That's a wonderful question. You know, we were dialoguing all the time with local leaders, political leaders, as we were going along, because what we were trying to do is to build a public opinion. So, for instance, when we were in the mountainous areas, as an example, in Armenia, and we saw how the water resources were diminished in downstream villages because of climate change and the destructive practices in upland agriculture, like we have in the Himalayas. We talked to the officials about the concept of water trusteeship, and you can see this if you go to our website at jaijagat2020.org. You will see many of these conversations and this advocacy. In fact, there's a whole listing of different advocacy issues which we have been discussing. So it absolutely was important at the local level, but it was also important for people to understand the larger global advocacy of the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO as financial institutions, how they are not, they're coming into countries and not helping the country to develop in a way that is peaceful, but creating deep conflict in the society. Use of global policies is to use, I think you've heard of the Sustainable Development Goals, following the very SDGs, which 193 governments have signed and approved, and that they are also destroying grassroots communities. And what we need at the global level is for good policies that are pro people and pro development, so it gives space for a proper development in each country that we visited. So that's what we were discussing on the march. But perhaps you have something to add.
Leela, in fact, the work of various organizations are designed in three parts. One part is called Sangharsh, that is struggle. People can mobilize and fight for their rights. It can be forest rights, it can be land rights. So one area is that people's mobilization is very important if you want to succeed in advocacy. If you just go and talk to people, they will listen to you and will say, okay, we will try to do something. But if they know there is people's power behind, and the genuine people are asking for new policies and programs, and then the advocacy works. So one part is struggle, the other part is advocacy, and this need to go hand in hand. That is why the new term called people's advocacy. People base is very important for success of advocacy. In the last many years, you must have seen in India, many of the changes, whether it is right to work or right to information, Forest Rights Act or land reform, these are all the result of struggle and dialogue coming together, people's mobilization and dialogue coming together, and that is powerful advocacy, right? But then there is also a third component called Rachana, that is constructive work. If you continue to struggle, if you continue to talk, that is not going to take you anywhere. So when you are not talking, when you are not struggling, what you do? We should be in the village with the people. And you have a lot of things to do there. Cottage industries, land development, water conservation. So a social activist should not be always fighting. That is not his full-time job. Social activist is not always talking to the system. Social activist is most of the time with the people, organizing their life and resources, because our main struggle all these years was one, people's right over natural resources, land, forest, and water. This should be people's right. And second, people's right to take decision about their own life. If they have no resources, if they have no decision making power about their own life, what is democracy all about? So a good advocacy will mean all the three component. One, talk where you should talk, fight where you should fight. But when there is no fight, there is no talk, get back to your base and create economic base for people so that they can have a better life with whatever natural resources they have. So this is what you call a process of advocacy, dialogue, and constructive work, etc., etc. So I think very important for social workers to understand this difference between these three and then follow the rule properly. Yeah, Kavita.
Yeah, Devika has a question.
Okay, please.
She has posted that what kind of reforms or a framework do you expect with the IMF and World Bank institutions to be
Yes.
more non-violent with the people?
Yeah, yeah. So, see, many people in the world are giving up. They said, look, World Bank, IMF, they have no reason to be there. They are useless organizations. But whether we like it or not, they are there, right? And they play a very, very important role, Devika. So, what can we do? We, unfortunately, the kind of young people about whom I was speaking, they're also there in the World Bank. They, in the World Bank, who are the people? Young people who are educated in very, very big schools and colleges, universities, never seen a village, and they don't know what is happening on the ground, and they go and sit there because salary is very high. So these people are not bad people, but not sensitive. When you go and talk to people in those organizations, you will feel good intention, good people, but they don't know what is the reality. See, when farmers commit suicide, World Bank really don't know farmers are committing because of their policies. So the farmers committing suicide is because of the World Bank IMF policies. Adivasis getting displaced is because of many of those global institution policies. Big dams are built because of their policies. Cities are coming up and slums are being built because of their policy. So our responsibility is to go and talk to them and make them understand that look, if you continue to follow this policy, situation is going to be very, very bad, and this is going to yield violence. See, when you push people too far onto the wall, they will react. And if they are not trained in non-violent reaction, they will react violently. Then don't say they're all anti-nationals, etc., etc. So this educational process need to begin even with organizations like World Bank, IMF, as long as they are there. But you also have organizations like ILO, International Labour Organization. Now we are trying to have dialogue with them because labor organization is only caring for organized labor. What about 95 percentage of unorganized labor? So ILO cannot say, look, we are only concerned about trade unions. They have to say, look, labor organization need to be concerned about all kinds of labor, bonded labor and daily wage earners, everybody. So we have a responsibility to understand the ground reality, and rather than rejecting these institutions, go and talk to them and make them understand. And luckily, you will find one or two people receptive to idea. Like if you go to your collector's office in your district, you may find 10 people negative, but you will also find one or two people positive. Hold on. See, within the system, there are also kind people, good people. As social activists, we have the responsibility to find them, work with them, rather than rejecting everybody saying that they're all corrupt. We don't talk. So advocacy and dialogue is a very, very important process for us to make social action successful, right? And because you have no power, you only have people's power. The political power, economic power are with them. So let us use people's power to engage them in a dialogue process. That is very important. Yes, Yogesh.
I thought your question here on the chat about how to bring nonviolence to India, where should we start? Are there, and so on, checklist and guidelines. What would be just interesting as a response to that, I think, is that right now we live in a highly fused and polarized society. And the very first step that when you know you're being nonviolent is when you try to not go to one side against the other, where you don't demonize the other, where you try to find a middle point. You try to pretend you're looking down on the conflict and you're trying to see where is there commonalities. How can I move this forward in a positive way, right? And I think that is what the training that we try to give is all about, is to separate oneself from just the violent structures in which we operate, begin to slowly not cooperate with those structures, find a positioning with violence, and see how you can bring people together across difference. It's much easier to bring together people who are like you, who share the same viewpoints. But how do you bring and slowly bring others closer to you? And I think this is a practice. This is a nonviolent practice, and it's everybody can do it, and you have to measure your progress with yourself. There's no competitive frame here because it's about cooperation. How can I better cooperate in this situation? How can I drop my ego and better cooperate with a situation to make it more nonviolent? So I think that is what one needs to do with oneself. And I'll leave it there because we're out of time. But maybe Rajajit wants to add something.
Also to say, see, guidelines, okay, maybe Yogesh or Leela can think of organizing a training program sometime in Madurai. All of us can come together, one to meet face to face. But one important area is to realize in the society there is direct violence and indirect violence. Direct violence you can see when people are killed, there is war, but there is a lot of indirect violence, exploitation, corruption, injustice. These are all indirect violence. Indirect violence is the reason very often the people become get into direct violence. So indirect violence is breeding ground for direct violence. So understanding that is very important to begin with. So you don't have to wait for violence to play a role. There is already indirect violence and we need to play a role to contain this violence. Second is, in areas where there is so much indirect violence, people are angry, very, very angry. And if you don't help them to divert this anger into positive action, this can become very violent reaction. So violence from one side and violence from the other side, and then the powerful lobbies will get the police to come and beat up the poor people. So violence will face violence and the government will mediate in the interest of the powerful. So our people are suffering, and top of it, if they become violent, they will suffer more. So how do we divert this while the anger into a non-violent action, very powerful action, so that the state will be forced to listen to, or the company will be forced to listen to, the contractor will be forced to listen to. So that is where the social activists need to have this understanding of what are the steps on the path of non-violence and how do you walk through. So we need to sit together sometime, and I hope Yogesh will facilitate a process of all of us coming together to really deepen our understanding about non-violence.
Yogesh, I suggest we just have a 2-minute closing remark. Does that sound like a good idea?